All right, everyone, welcome to another day. Today, we're going to have a conversation about kids specifically. We're going to talk about some of the common, what's the word? Challenges that some kids deal with and their connection to what's going on in their body and what might be driving that. Selfishly, my daughter is dealing with a little bit of one of them, so I'm going to selfishly ask some questions. And get into some other things off of that. And in order to do that, I'm not doing that clearly. In order to do that, we have our guest today, Deirdre Bloomquist. She's a functional nutritionist. She's the founder of Always Growing Wellness, and it's a group that really focuses on toxic burden and its role in complex health conditions. And they do have a specialty in working in pediatrics as well. And so Deirdre's perfect to have this conversation with. And with all that said, hey, welcome.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I know there's not a lot of people who know how to work with kids, and we have a really thriving pediatric practice. So I'm excited to share what we're seeing and how that can help parents.
Cool. Where are you located?
I'm in Colorado, actually, but we have a fully virtual practice. So we actually have practitioners spread all over the country, and we work with clients all over the country as well.
Oh, amazing. That's great. Very similar to what we do. So I wonder if you had a similar, talk to me about how you got into this and like how you ended up being everywhere versus like in one spot and even what drove you into this field.
Yeah, so kind of how this all started was I got pregnant and I knew how important gut health was, and I did a lot of prep work to ensure that I gave my son a lot of good gut health. He was born at home. I hadn't taken antibiotics in over a decade. He was breastfed. I feel like I did all the right things to set him up for healthy gut health. And when he was about 9 months old, he got a little patch of eczema. And like a first-time parent, I went to his pediatrician. I asked for help. They were actually very integrative, and they said, it's probably a gut health issue. Let's talk about some things you can do, which was great. I changed my diet. I was so stressed out about what I was eating, especially while he was breastfeeding, and got to the point where we did allergy testing, came back with no allergies, and they basically said, we don't know. We're just going to do a topical steroid, and I didn't want to do that. It didn't sit right with me that we weren't really addressing why this was happening. So I decided I was going to run testing on him that I was actually running on adults at the time, even though I had never worked with kids, just to kind of see what came back. And he came back with huge gut dysbiosis, a lot of bacterial and parasitic infections. His calprotectin levels, which are inflammatory levels, were off the charts. They were maxed out. They're the highest I've ever seen on testing. And he had a lot of mold and a lot of heavy metals in his urine as well. So I put him on a protocol, and within about a month, his eczema went away, and it's never come back. And he tolerates foods. He doesn't have to be on an ongoing protocol. And as I started sharing a lot of this, I realized there were a lot of parents who needed help, and parents started coming out of the woodwork to say, can you help my child? They've been struggling with eczema for years. So we started building our pediatric practice. I hired a woman named Julia, who was one of the only people I knew at the time who was working with kids in this capacity. And we started building this and working with more and more kids. And we now have 5 practitioners on staff who work solely with kids. I used to have a brick and mortar in Denver, Colorado. And when COVID happened, I had always kind of wanted to shift into the virtual space, but it kind of made it a very easy transition ultimately. And now, because of the way that testing works, when it is patient direct, we can get testing directly to people's homes, so it makes it very easy to work virtually.
Wow, that's really cool. It's really cool. It's the fact that you even had like an integrative mindset of pediatrician is
Huge.
amazing. The fact that like, oh, let's talk about gut at least is cool. But even in that sense, we see what happens, right? And it really talks about like the need for specialists in areas. There's just too much in the body for everyone to know how to do everything.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
So you found a lot of stuff in your son. So can we talk about the testing that you did in order to uncover these things?
Yep. So the stool test that I did was a GI map from Diagnostic Solutions. It's going to be looking at beneficial bacteria, but it also looks at opportunistic bacteria, yeast and parasites, tells us about liver function, immune function, and inflammation. So that's how I could tell what was actually happening in his microbiome in terms of good, bad, and otherwise. And then the toxin test that I ran was the total toxin burden from Vibrant Wellness. That one is screening for mycotoxins from mold, heavy metals, as well as industrial chemicals. So pesticides, plastic, personal care chemicals. And I had grown up in a moldy home. I never really had any symptoms. I'm a very healthy person, eat well, work out, didn't have anything huge that would indicate that there was a mold issue. But a lot of that had been transferred in utero to him. And then I didn't realize even preconception that the fillings that I had in my mouth that were silver fillings did contain a lot of heavy metals. And so when he was conceived, a lot of those things started being transferred to him that I've had since removed, but didn't realize how much they were going to be impacting the way that his gut was able to function, even though gut health was in a really good spot.
Wow. So a lot of this is focused on gut, it sounds like. So like if we zoomed out a little bit and talked about like how the gut is actually driving, let's just focus on eczema. That's like a super common thing for people. My daughter has it, so I'm going to start asking questions. What's the gut like? How much contribution to the problem is gut, or is it sometimes, but it could also be a bunch of other things? Or do you find that it all kind of usually goes back to gut? Is that sort of the thought?
Yeah, I do think it usually all goes back to the gut, and it's just going to be a little bit different for every child in terms of the severity of things. So I think with eczema in particular, one of the things that often comes up is food, for instance. And it's what foods are we eating that my child is reactive to? And I think a lot of parents do understand that it's not true food allergies, but we're more thinking about food sensitivities. And there becomes a lot of fear around food and a lot of frustration when we're trying to trace back, what did my child eat that resulted in this eczema flare, because I feel like I've been feeding them all the same things. So the way I usually describe this is food can be a trigger, but food isn't really the problem. The problem is what's happening in the gut. So if there is any permeability in the small intestine where the lining of the intestines has actually opened up, this means that food can go directly from the intestinal tract into the bloodstream, where we then mount a chemical immune response to food. That means that we're going to see these flares and be having an immune response to things that are otherwise benign. So the real question then becomes, what's causing that permeability in the gut in the first place? We're thinking first and foremost about pathogens in the gut. So overgrowths of things that are inflammatory in nature, like bacteria, yeast, and parasites. And then taking things even a step further to say, why are these pathogens overgrowing? Because I truly believe that the human body can heal itself and keep things in balance when it has the tools to do so. But we know that there are a lot of things that we come in contact with, and that our kids are even coming in contact with, that create susceptibility for those pathogens to overgrow as well.
So what are the reasons? Why do they overgrow?
Yeah. So in doing a ton of research on this and looking at different things that we're all exposed to from a toxin perspective, we know that pathogens can overgrow as a result of these exposures. So for instance, there's certain bacteria that break down different chemicals that we come in contact with, or pesticides. So for instance, there's a bacteria called Pseudomonas. Pseudomonas actually metabolizes things like glyphosate pesticides. So if we have big glyphosate exposures or accumulation in the body, as a protective mechanism, our body starts to overgrow these Pseudomonas species to actually metabolize it and break it down. The same thing can happen even with things like Candida. Well, we know that Candida can certainly overgrow and colonize the body as a result of mold exposure, which is a big one that we see even with kids, whether they've been exposed during the course of their life or if mom was exposed. We also know that Candida can metabolize and break down things like radioactive substances, radium and uranium, but also heavy metals. And so again, the body is having this protective reaction to things that kids are being exposed to, and that is then disrupting the balance of the good and the bad pathogens and organisms that are supposed to reside in our GI tract.
Wow. I've never heard that explanation before. And it actually makes a lot of sense. So then you have, talk about the Candida piece, right? So, I mean, yeah, they both work the same way. So one of them is overgrowing as a result of trying to fix the other thing that's coming in, right? So what does the overgrowth, like, what is that causing? Like, so now there's more Candida in the body, but there's also more mold in the body. But then it's like kind of trying to clean up the mold effectively. Is that kind of what I'm understanding? And then you have more Candida. So like, what is the balance like portion, I guess, of all of this, and like the tipping point at where it creates effectively leaky gut is what I'm hearing when you talk about like gut permeability, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The tipping point can be different for all kids, I think, and it really has to do with the current state of their immune system. And if the immune system is healthy, meaning it has the nutrients it needs to produce adequate white blood cells, so that's going to be things like protein in the diet, which is notoriously difficult sometimes to
So
get
hard
kids
to
to
do.
eat.
So hard to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we got to have them get enough protein, but they also need nutrients like zinc, for instance, to support things like stomach acid to break down protein, but then also to support immune function. There's also kids who just become immunocompromised. So we know that kids who live in moldy homes, for instance, have some level of immune compromisation at some point in time where they get sick with everything. They're sick for long periods of time. And the immune system can't keep up with anything that it's being exposed to, but also anything internally in the gut as well. And so we'll start to see those things shift and overgrow where they then become symptomatic. Sometimes that looks like eczema. Sometimes it looks like digestive changes. So it can be things like constipation, for instance, where kids are struggling to have bowel movements on a daily basis. Sometimes it looks like diarrhea, but more commonly a little bit on the constipation side. We can see behavioral concerns with kids, so where they might almost be mistaken as being on the spectrum. They'll have a lot of sensory seeking behavior where they're crashing, banging their head, having really big outbursts. And then we even see things like dental decay with kids when there is disruption in the gut and toxin burden because of the way that we know how mold and other toxins can displace minerals in the body, impact the gut, decrease the ability to absorb nutrients in the GI tract as well, which just means that they're deficient and they don't have all the things that they need in order to develop normally.
So without testing like broad, it sounds like it's maybe a combination. Well, I mean, we're talking a lot about eczema, so there's other things. Maybe we'll bring a couple of those up. So, so does like constipation and these other things that falls into the same category? Eczema is one thing. There's constipation. There's these other things you're talking about. So you're a nutritionist. You work in kid world, so you already joked about how difficult it is to get kids to eat stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I will tell you, I'm in this world. I talk to a lot of people. You know, you did everything you could to prep yourself, like things. It just sort of happens the way it does. I have such a hard time getting my kids to eat anything outside of the 5 things that they want to eat, and it's, you know, none of it is great. You know, at the age I have a 6 and a 4-year-old, like none of it is great. What have you seen helpful in shifting what a diet might look like that's more supportive of a healthy gut?
Yeah, great question. So, one of the things that I think about when kids are really picky eaters and they only want to eat certain things is that kids are really intuitive and they're not like adults in that if something doesn't feel good in their body, they'll just keep doing it. So, for instance, when kids don't want to eat protein, for instance, there could be impaired digestive capacity, meaning that they're struggling to actually chemically break down those foods in their gut. And so as a result, they kind of lean away from those things naturally. We'll see kids who have poor fat absorption do the same thing where they don't want to eat fats because it hurts their stomach. And so one of the things that I think is worth considering as parents, I have a 4-year-old as well, I know how hard this is that kids, while they're being picky eaters, sometimes they are also being intuitive because they're very in touch with what's happening in their bodies too. So from that perspective, we can come to it very compassionately. And then from there, we're really thinking about broadening their diet and making things taste good for kids too. So a lot of times when it comes to food, it's not so much restricting kids and saying you can't have gluten or you can't have things that are processed. It's more like, how can we bring things in that are protein dense and nutrient supportive in a way that is fun and different for them? First thing I would say is getting kids involved in the kitchen can be so incredibly helpful and involving them in the process. One of the things that happens when we're eating food is when we're preparing food is we're smelling the food, we're cooking the food. We start to actually start the chemical digestion process before we put a bite in our mouth whatsoever. And a lot of times for kids, they are sitting in the other room, they're doing something else at the time that parents are preparing food. So the more that we can involve them, they actually start that process, and they're a lot more likely to enjoy the meal when we involve them as well. From there, we want to start thinking about like chemical digestion support. So even easy things like chewable digestive enzymes help chemically digest food so that as we introduce it for kids, they're getting what they need out of it. They're less likely to be having any of those adverse responses where it hurts their stomach or it's not sitting right for them or causing any of those like down the line digestive issues, so that they're more likely to eat more of those things. And then I would also say just introducing things on a regular basis without any pressure for them to consume it can go really well as well. So, you know, little kids, if you're like, hey, you need to eat your food, it usually doesn't go well, right? It's everyone is having a bad time at dinner if we're stressing over what our kids are eating and them cleaning their plates and everything, even though we as parents have the best of intentions and need them to eat their food so that they grow and don't go to bed hungry and things like that. But I think the more that we can kind of model for kids, like, hey, this is how you sit down for a meal, and leave them kind of to their own thing, sitting together as a family, is going to show them like, hey, we can eat and we can have conversation and connect and recreate that sense of safety and putting kids' nervous system into the correct state so that they can chemically digest their food properly. If they eat, great. If they don't eat, you can approach it however you want to from your own parenting perspective, of course. If it's like, hey, you're not eating anything else before dinner, or maybe it's like, hey, this is your one option before bed. You can hold on to this food and you can have it before you go to bed, essentially.
You mentioned like the nervous system in the right state. And then you also mentioned like eating as a family. Is there a connection between like group eating like that set versus, I don't know, sitting in the room with the TV on or something? Like, is there a connection between those two differences on how it helps not only with digestion possibly, but also just their ability to want to eat different things?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we try to recommend is to eat undistracted as a family, meaning that you're sitting down together, no screens, if nothing else. And that includes parents on their phones. The reason that this is so important is, as I mentioned, chemical digestion starts before we put food in our mouth. And the thing that we need to be happening in order to put our digestion in an optimized state is that the nervous system is in what's called a parasympathetic state, which is our rest and digest state. The opposite is sympathetic, which is our fight or flight. And anytime we are being exposed to a screen where there is blue light being emitted, we're thinking about something else, we're not focused on the food in front of us, we are inadvertently in that sympathetic state, even if we don't feel stressed in any way. And so by sitting together as a family and having no distractions where we're just communicating with one another, it puts us into that parasympathetic state so that kids can chemically digest their food, but it's also good for us as adults from a chemical digestion perspective. And I think that connection really can also help kids slow down. So one of the things that we're often coaching parents on is encouraging kids to chew their food thoroughly, right? Rather than just wolfing it down and swallowing things, because chewing is also very important. And part of that has to do with modeling things. If you're having a conversation with a child and kind of just bantering back and forth, it forces them to slow down because they're going to be chewing their food, waiting for you to respond as you're chewing your food. And so there becomes this really natural rhythm of things.
How about, you mentioned like making things taste good. So they're in the kitchen watching me make something they hate. So they're probably not going to eat it. So let's talk about protein specifically. What are some like cool, you have a 4-year-old too. What are some tips and tricks that you're using to make stuff taste good, that's fun for them, examples, anything like that?
Yeah. Is it like for you in particular, because I think it's usually similar for everybody, is you mentioned it's protein. Are there like certain foods in particular that they're just like, gosh, I just hate when you make that?
I feel like they go through stages where I only eat X. Like actually, if you asked me that question, I was like, what are the foods they hate? I would talk for like 3 days. I feel like it's only like, what are the foods that they will eat? And I can name the 5. Okay. And so it's like, if it isn't one of these things, it's, I don't like that, or gross, or I'm not going to eat this. And then it just, it becomes like a thing. And then like our 4-year-old, he literally just won't eat it, right? I was like, here it is, done with dinner, hasn't touched any of it. It's like, okay, time to go to bed. And on one hand, I'm like, all right, I mean, we know kids can go like a little bit without eating, like, so it doesn't bother me that much. But like, then they start yelling and screaming and complaining, and they're wanting snacks. And it's like, as the parent, you want to sit there and deal with the yelling and the screaming. It makes me sound like a great parent. But I feel like everybody relates to this.
Totally.
It's like, gosh, like I'm now getting berated by my 4-year-old because he's hangry.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Yep. Absolutely. So what are the 5 foods that they like? Maybe that would be helpful too, because we can put like a healthy, like more protein spin on it.
let me share my 6-year-old more, because she's the one that's having like the eczema issues. So for anyone else that maybe you have kids that are similar, so she actually for now a couple of years, it started on the backs of her hands, and it would get really, really irritated and really uncomfortable. We kind of felt there was a sensitivity towards soaps or different things or whatever. So we ended up sending her to school with like a special soap, and it helped. But she washes her hands a lot. She has like this, she's a COVID kid. So I think she has this inborn trauma of like not having clean hands all the time, which we're trying to work through a little bit. But so she washes her hands a lot, and it always kind of started on her hands. And if the back of her hands were in that irritated state, it was really painful for her. And it wasn't all the time. It would come, it would go. And then recently, just like in the last few weeks, it started like working up her forearms, like kind of from like wrist to elbow for people who can't see. And so you would see like red kind of streaks like going up there. And the same thing, really painful. Water gets on it, she's crying. We had to do a shower one night, and it was like torture for her. So we're trying to work through that. And so those are kind of like the symptom presentations of the eczema stuff. In terms of diet, I mean, for dinners, it's basically one of a few things. It's either pizza, it's cheeseburger, it's chicken nuggets. She'll eat those things.
Okay.
She's better with that stuff more than the 4-year-old. And like, quesadillas or something. It's like a lot of like carbs and cheese. And then if we can mix in meat in there, maybe she'll do it. But it's mostly chicken nuggets. It's like kind of the main way that she'll get meat.
Okay.
Lunches are either a sandwich, or she'll do cottage cheese, where I can get like protein in that way. And then, she'll eat eggs in the morning. I mean, she's not super like, I won't eat protein. I think that our boy is more that than she is. So she'll eat eggs in the morning. She'll eat like Greek yogurt that has some stuff in it. So she'll do some of that. And we make like protein pancakes that the kids like to eat and stuff. So
Perfect. Yeah.
I think we got that. Like, so she doesn't have the broadest eyes. She's no vegetables. She'll eat a lot of fruit.
Okay.
Like that's kind of what her diet looks like. But it seems like the eczema breakouts are getting worse, and they're spreading, and they're getting, covering a larger surface area on the body.
Totally. Okay. I have a couple of thoughts. First, I want to say one of the things that we always want to be thinking about with kids, particularly as it then relates to things like dinner, where we're having these shared meals, is success for dinner often starts with breakfast. So the idea of like protein pancakes is a great idea, because we want to make sure that we're balancing blood sugar for kids first thing in the morning with their very first meal. Healthy blood sugar regulation is deeply tied to gut health. And so we need to make sure that blood sugar management is in a good spot for kids, so that they are ideally not having crashes throughout the day. That means that we're focusing on proteins and fats in the morning, which is part of why eggs are so great for everybody, is that they have a lot of protein and a lot of fat. But then also maybe thinking about introducing things that are not traditionally breakfast foods if kids like them. So even like chicken nuggets, while they might not be great, we could have those for breakfast as a really great protein source, especially if they will eat it. Protein's gonna help keep kids satiated, and then fat helps manage blood sugar. So if they do have carbs with that meal, whether it's pancakes or fruit or cereal or whatever it is, they're gonna have less of a blood sugar spike, and therefore less of a crash in the future. And then from there, we're really thinking about having regularly timed meals throughout the day. So for younger kids, that range is gonna be between 2 and 3 hours. As they get older, it grows to the time frame that adults can typically withstand, which is between 3 and 4 hours, usually between meals, or at least snacks. So that's thing number one. Then I would try to like find the things that she likes and just make them more robust. So even if she likes chicken nuggets, there's this thing that we make where we take chicken breast or chicken thigh, you can do either one, grind it up in like your KitchenAid grinders, essentially with an attachment. You're gonna take that, mix it with an egg, with some mozzarella cheese, and then pre-cook something like broccoli and chop it into small pieces so it's just kind of like the heads of the broccoli. Mix it all together, put it in a circle, smush it down, bake it for about 15 minutes on each side. They come out, they're kind of like a really healthy adult chicken nugget, but there's added nutrients in there in terms of added egg and added dairy. So it becomes this really well-rounded meal. And kids tend not to fight us on vegetables when they're hidden in foods like that. Like they can see them, they know that there's vegetable there because it's green, but it's not so overt that it's like they're only putting broccoli in their mouth, which is hard for adults even sometimes. So that can be a really easy way to sneak things in, but also just make them more nutrient dense and robust, working off of something that they already really enjoy doing. For your daughter, I was thinking about with like the washing her hands and everything. One of the things you might consider looking at is Triclosan. Triclosan is an ingredient that gets put in a lot of hand sanitizers and soaps. It's antibacterial, which is the reason that it often is used. But it can actually produce bacterial resistance. And one of the things when we're thinking about eczema and any skin condition is that our skin actually has its own microbiome. So for a lot of kids, it actually means we're reducing the way that we're washing their skin, for instance. So kids who have like full body eczema, we're actually reducing baths and showers, and we're decreasing soap use as well, so that we can kind of restore balance to that microbiome living on their skin. The other thing with things like Triclosan is they impact specific detoxification pathways in the liver. So Triclosan, for instance, can impact glucuronidation. Glucuronidation is very important for a detoxification pathway. It impacts a lot of other different toxins that we come in contact with as well. One of the key ways that we can support that is through cruciferous vegetables. So your broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, leafy greens, things like that. But it might mean sneaking those things in, even if it's in the form of like protein smoothies where there's lots of fruit, sneak in some vegetables. You can put protein, collagen, even things like fish oil in there can be incredibly supportive for kids with skin issues to restore balance to cell membrane health and make sure that they have adequate fatty acids in a way that doesn't require them to be doing like shots of cod liver oil unless they want to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure they would love that.
Yeah.
So you were talking about like topical skin microbiome. So how much of these, so we talked earlier about like how gut is tied to a lot of this stuff, but now we're kind of talking about other areas. So like how much of this is gut, how much of it is other systems that are happening, and like what is the like what's sort of the path that you take when you're working down trying to figure out what it is?
Yeah, so I think with the gut is our primary microbiome, but the thing to keep in mind is that it's shared with other systems in the body. So for instance, we know that the gut microbiome can transfer to the reproductive microbiome, and it will influence the skin microbiome as well. Even the oral microbiome is connected to the gut microbiome. So I think all of these things are intimately connected, and when we see dysfunction in one area, it means that the others are likely impacted as well. So with things like skin issues, we always want to look at the gut and make sure that there isn't anything overtly out of whack there, essentially, that needs rebalancing. Sometimes that's as simple as that there's low beneficial bacteria that needs supported through something like a probiotic, and then fermented foods and lots of fiber in the diet. And sometimes it is a larger issue where we're thinking about things like toxin burden. In terms of working through things, when we're working with kids, we always run a stool test and we always run a toxin test. We used to only do the gut test, and we ended up having to go back to parents and say, I really think we need to test them for mold in a lot of cases. So now we do both up front just to rule out mold, if nothing else. Mold is the big driver a lot of times where we're seeing dysfunction in the GI tract, but it obviously also tells us about heavy metals and chemicals and how they might be impacting the liver. That really can help us determine what the total burden really looks like for each kid individually. And what I can tell you is that we run these tests on adults and kids. Kids always have worse toxin burdens than adults do. They're some of the worst toxin burdens I've ever seen.
And is that because their immune system isn't developed and they're not detoxifying properly and things are pulling more?
Yep, they don't have fully mature detoxification systems. They also can be very good excretors, especially young kids. So we work with kids as young as 6 months old. They tend to have the worst toxin burdens because they're just getting rid of everything, and they're exposed to a lot of different things because of clothing and what we're putting them in and the toys they're touching, and they put everything in their mouth. And so they just come in contact with a lot more oftentimes because they are still learning how to, integrate with the world and interact with it.
So with that in mind, what does detoxing kids look like? Is it similar to how you work with adults? Is it just different dosages or different amounts that you're doing? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it is very similar to how we work with adults. The big thing is the dosage change. So anytime we're determining dosages for children, it's going to be based not only on their age, but their body weight. And for kids, it's very important that we introduce things one at a time, especially because many of them are very sensitive. Their bodies are so small, they react very quickly, both positively and negatively. The other thing that we do with kids is we layer things in. So we're not doing everything at once. This is one of the things where we see kids kind of crash and burn sometimes when they go through protocols, is they start everything in terms of, we want to rebalance the gut. We know that there's mold and we need a detox, and so they start there. Where we start is more if kids are itchy. How are we supporting histamine metabolism and breakdown? Is this more of an enzyme issue? Do we need herbal supports? Or are they simply constipated and not eliminating things like histamine on a regular basis? Making sure that they are having bowel movements, and then supporting key detoxification organs like the liver and kidneys to make sure that they're in a good spot so that when we get to the point of either doing any eradication or rebalancing of pathogens, their body can withstand that. But this is also really important when we do think about toxins, because many of them are hepatotoxic, meaning that they're toxic to the liver, and they're going to be impacting the ability of the liver to function. So anytime we are rebalancing or removing anything in the body, it's kind of like if you've ever taken an antibiotic and you got worse before you got better. That's because all of that burden then goes on the liver. And if the liver is already struggling, as it is with many of these kids, they tend to feel worse before they feel better. So by supporting the kidneys and the liver first, it just means that they're able to move through protocols a lot smoother and a lot safer and be a whole lot less reactive. So with kids, we're never looking at like die-off or detox reactions. We want it to be as seamless as possible so they almost know that nothing's happening.
So how long does the process go? So you're doing like initially, you're essentially like priming the detox pathway so they're open, effective, things can move out, they don't get stuck, and then you move into detox phase next. Obviously, every kid's different or whatever, but like what's sort of the timing generally look like between each of these phases when you're going through this?
Yeah, I would say typically with kids' protocols, they're about 3 to 4 months in duration, even when it comes to things like mold. The only difference there is we typically work with families in 6-month increments so that we can move at the pace that makes sense for kids. If they're sensitive, introduce things one at a time. If they're reactive and we need to back off of things. Or if it's as simple as, they go on vacation, they get sick, they got birthdays, kids don't want to do things sometimes. That way we can work with the family to make sure that they move at the pace that makes sense for them.
Got it. Looks like I'll be talking to you after this. So you mentioned in this somewhere, talking about in utero transfer of mold issues if the parent or the mom has had historic mold issues in the past. And I think that that's something worth kind of diving in here a little bit. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the biggest things I wish I knew before I became a mom. So we know that mold, metals, and chemicals can be transferred in utero the same way that we think about the microbiome being transferred. And we often think about the placenta being formed, and this is kind of our detoxification organ for baby themselves, but that's what we're coming in contact with during pregnancy, is what the placenta is responsible for. This means that everything else that we've come in contact with up until the point of conception may have accumulated in our system if we have any impaired detoxification. So this can get transferred. It will look different in our kids because we're kind of mixing genes when we have children, right? So for example, I'm very healthy, my husband's very healthy, we had no health issues before having my son. In doing genetic testing, I have poor detoxification susceptibility and he has more susceptibility to inflammation. Neither of us have symptoms, but you put those two together in our child, bad detoxification, susceptibility to inflammation, and that's exactly what we saw for him. So it just depends on the child, how they're going to respond to things. Even siblings can look different. So sometimes presentation between children will look totally different, where one kid has a lot of health issues and the other, it looks different. Maybe they're healthier, maybe it's just a different type of health concern. But we know that these things can transfer. They can also be transferring via things like breast milk as well. So we know that mycotoxins transfer via breast milk. So we're always thinking about the way that children are connected to mom in particular. Mom is baby's first home, and that terrain influences the way that they develop.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. The terrain theory thing makes a lot of sense, and a lot of it, like even when we're out and we're grown-ups, like so a lot of times terrain, you think like your internal terrain, that's what terrain theory is, and then it helps, prevent things like that. But our bodies live in a house, and that's a terrain.
Yep.
So now we're an organism inside a larger terrain, and that terrain impacts this organism, which then downstreams the internal body organisms, and there's like multiple terrains that all connect.
Yep, absolutely.
This has been really, really interesting. Like I know so many parents who have kids that have like these things going on. I've been telling my wife it's her gut, like it's gut problems. Like I know it's gut problems, but I don't like know what the gut problems are, right? And it's like, oh, well, it must be your diet. She eats all these, things that all these kids eat or whatever. And in the grand scheme, I actually think that what she eats is probably healthier than what a lot of other kids eat because we don't, there's a lot of things that we just don't do. Like we were out the other day at some event and all the families, the kids and the friends and everything was there. Somebody was like talking about like going to McDonald's afterwards. And my daughter looked at me, she's like, what's McDonald's? I'm like, it's something you'll never ever need to go to. Like, and it's so like I feel like there's a lot there that just from our natural way of life that is not happening, right? So then when I think of it that way, I'm like, right, I mean, she's probably starting out better than a lot of other kids are.
Mm-hmm.
No juices, no sodas, no fast food, like none, all of that stuff. And when she eats bread, I mean, my wife makes bread at home to make sure all the ingredients are like what they, as good as it can be. Like we do a lot of those things. And so, seeing the eczema stuff specifically for her and how impactful and how painful it is for her, it's, it's tough, it's, you go to your doctor and they're like, oh, that's what you said, right?
Yep.
Here, put this on, it'll make it feel better. So yeah, it makes sense to get into the initial, I mean, it's the thing. Everybody listening is the thing. Like, I know enough of this to have known that I should be doing a GI map and a toxin burden test. Like, I know enough of this world that I've done them all myself. Like, I know all these things. And yet it's like you need someone sometimes to like reaffirm these things that you kind of already know, right? And I see that in our clients that we work with. I'm sure you see it in your clients that you work with. It's so important to have guidance from somebody who is like third party, not emotionally tied.
It's
can
hard.
Give you,
You're so
like,
close to it when it's your kids. It's hard to make any clinical decisions when it's your little loved ones.
Yeah. It's like, is this the right one for them? I'm not actually this doctor person.
Yeah.
So like, I don't, and then you get this paralysis thing. Like this happens with everybody in every single walk of life.
Yep.
And it's so important to have, a team you surround yourself with that you trust on specific things to help. I was just talking to a client about this the other day. I was like, think of you as like, insert your name, corporation, and you need a board of directors, and every person on your board serves a specific role and they add value to your company, your corporation, right? So you need like, if I'm on your board, that's awesome, but that means you need to trust me on your board. That means if I tell you what I think, that you need to believe what I tell you. Otherwise, why am I on your board, right? And the same goes, across the board.
Yeah. And I think it gets so tricky too because, man, I've never seen two kids with eczema that have the exact same issues. And I think a lot of times what happens, particularly in the skin health space for kids, is eczema is kind of this big umbrella term that encompasses all skin issues. We'll every once in a while see a child who's been diagnosed with psoriasis, but it's the same as contact dermatitis, right? We're talking about a skin issue. But all of these things are very unique for every single child. And so as much as parents often do go to Instagram or the internet to try and figure out like, how do I fix eczema? It really does have to be so bio-individual. And that's where the testing really paints a very clear picture of what each child needs. So even from a toxin perspective, it's like, what detoxification does your child struggle with? Because it's not going to be the same as their sibling, even most likely, and being able to support them uniquely.
And I think you explained that really well when you were talking through like you'll have bacteria overgrowth if there's a glyphosate issue, you'll have candida overgrowth if there's a mold issue. But the overgrowths of those two things are causing the same problem, which is leaky gut, permeability, things getting out. So it's like, yeah, technically my problem is leaky gut, but why? And backing into it, and you can't assume it's a candida thing. It might be a bacteria thing, and then what's the reason behind that? So like, I think actually you explained that really, really well, and it's the first time I've really heard like that explanation around what causes the dysbiosis and dysfunction in the gut. It's all just constantly a result of something else is triggering a result, which is crazy.
Yeah. And even, in a lot of us who have healthy homes, we're making healthy decisions, we're controlling the things that we can control. I think the thing to keep in mind is that we're all exposed to toxins in some capacity. It's going to be different for everybody, and zero is not the goal, but understanding what that looks like in our children, especially when they're symptomatic, can be really helpful for determining where are those exposure areas, or is this just an accumulation issue ultimately?
Cool. Well, I feel like people are probably thinking the same I am, where this is super helpful. Granted, I was asking very particular questions about myself, so maybe I feel like it was more helpful. But I do know this is something a lot of people deal with, so hopefully there's like connection there. So if people want to work with you, if they want to talk with you, like how does that happen?
Yeah. So they can go to our website, which is always-growing.com, and you can go to our pediatric page. We have a lot of video testimonials of parents that we've worked with. There's information about our program, the testing that's included, pricing, everything. From there, you can apply to work with us, and then we schedule a free 30-minute call, and this is actually with me. So we'll go through, talk about what's been happening for your child. We can look at any testing that's already been run, start connecting dots, and talk about why the testing that we recommend may or may not be helpful for them and kind of what they can expect throughout the process. I then pair them with one of our pediatric practitioners as their primary practitioner. Our whole pediatric team works on all of our cases together, so you're not only getting one person's set of eyes, it's actually 5 people looking at every case. So a lot of expertise on our team when it comes to kids. And then we walk you through the whole protocol. We're there every step of the way to make sure that you have lots of support, questions are getting answered, and that it doesn't feel super lonely, because I know how lonely this whole thing can feel, especially when you're going at it from a holistic perspective. But you can also find us on Instagram. Our Instagram is at alwaysgrowing_littles. We call our kids our littles. And you can find a lot of before and after pictures, more about what we do, things that we see commonly go wrong. There's a lot of free education that I've done there as well.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining and sharing all of this. I feel like it was incredibly helpful. And you're at least going to talk to one person out of it, which is me. But outside of it, I mean, listen, the kid stuff is really hard. The pediatricians are like good for some things, just like regular general practitioners are good for some things. And then a lot of things, there's just like a limitation there. And with kids, it's even so much harder to find someone who will work with kids and then work with adults even on a functional level. So it's super helpful to have a conversation like this with you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. This has been great. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye.